In the mid-1970s, Vivitar tried to up its game by introducing a series of premium lenses which it branded Vivitar Series 1. It included this lens as well as a series of other lenses. What makes this lens special? Let's jump into the video and talk about it. And so this is the Vivitar Series 1 35 to 85. This is known as the variable focal length lens. It's not a zoom. Zoom, as most people think about it, is that as you zoom, the focus, your focus point stays the same. But if you'll notice these little curved lines, so what happens is as you zoom and change the focal length, you're supposed to then slightly refocus the lens along these lines. Of course, in practice, that's very difficult to do. So all you really simply do is you just focus. I mean, because it is a push-pull zoom, you simply find your focal length that you want, and then you just refocus the lens. It sounds like it's difficult, but in practice, you don't even think about it. It is so easy. And I think even with a traditional push-pull zoom, you tend to refocus slightly anyway, so it's never been a big deal. So when you bought this lens, you got the screw-in lens cap, a lens shade that fits to the outside of the lens, not a screw-in lens shade. And so there's a small little thumb screw here to then keep the lens shade in place. I had bought a skylight filter. And what is the filter size on this? Filter size is 72 millimeters, so I don't remember the cost, but it was quite a bit more than 52 millimeters. There's a chance that I actually have a polarizing filter in that size. I think I bought one at the time. Not sure where it is. Sure, it's in a bag somewhere. So when you look at the front of the lens, you can see here where it says Vivitar Series 1. You'll see then the zoom or the range, the focal length range, which is 35 to 85. You'll see that it's also 2.8. So this 2.8 is fixed. That's its maximum aperture, and it's fixed across the entire focal length range. And so that's actually in itself quite impressive, because there was a point where the consumer zoom started coming out, and it would have like 2.8/5.6. And what that would often mean, at the widest setting, it was f2.8, but at the furthest, the telephoto setting, it was 5.6. So trying to keep a constant aperture across the range, is particularly with this zoom range, which is medium wide angle to medium telephoto, that became a bit more difficult to do. This says auto variable focusing. And all that means is it's not a true zoom, it's a variable focus lens. Somewhere on here, oh, there it is. VMC, which stood for Vivitar Multi-Coating. Keep in mind that Vivitar was a photographic company, but Vivitar was not a photographic manufacturer. Every lens, flash unit, filter, and every other accessory was actually produced by another company and then rebadged as Vivitar. There have been different manufacturers of this lens. I don't know what manufacturer made this lens, but the early Series 1's lenses all tended to have sort of a same look and feel. So it has a little diamond grip rubber focusing ring, and you can see that it's quite wide. The lens itself is quite substantial, so as you zoom in and out, watch what happens. So several things happen, right? So as I zoom in and out, you'll notice two things. One is the barrel extends forward and then retracts again. And you can see that. See how it extends forward before retracting? And then also, in addition to doing that, that front element also rotates. So there is quite a bit of complexity to this lens. So the lens designers had to figure out a way to keep a constant aperture of f2.8 and then also ensure that infinity focus didn't change. And as you can see, it was quite a challenge because it forced the front element to rotate and also slide in and slide out. So there is quite a bit going on with this lens. Aperture range runs from 2.8 to f16. and there are half stops in between the full stops. This lens uses 12 elements in 9 groups. So I bought this in 1979, and I think it was toward the end of summer or possibly in early fall. I bought this before I went on my first bus trip, which was to Luxembourg, where I saw General Patton's grave, by the way. But I took this lens with me and took some photos with it, and I actually enjoy using this. In fact, I carried this around. I carried this lens with me on nearly every trip that I went on every tour that I went on, for the next year and a half. And that's really saying something because this is a fairly substantial lens. Let's weigh the lens and we'll discuss that. So we'll weigh this lens with the lens shade on because that's how I used it for the next year and a half or so. And this lens, together with its lens shade, weighs 1 pound 10 ounces. So it's a fairly substantial lens. It has a good amount of weight to it. And the body that I used it on, although I don't think I had it for my first bus trip, but I did for subsequent tours, was the Nikon F2A. So that weighs almost identical to the lens, 1 pound 13 ounces, slightly more. So together, the F2A with this lens came in at 3 pounds 7 ounces, or 3.5, just slightly more than 3.5 pounds. You can see how this used to say Vivitar Series 1, but through the years it's just worn away. I had a habit of always keeping either a skylight filter, 1A, or a UV filter on the front of the lens, and that was really to protect the front lens element. So years ago, I had a friend's mother take a photo of the two of us, and as she removed the camera from her neck, it flipped upward, and her lipstick-covered lips planted a smoocher right on the front of the lens. Luckily, I had a filter on it, so all I did was I think I threw away the filter and just bought a new one. And so that served as a reminder to me that, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to keep a filter on the front. You can see that this is quite a substantial package with the two of them. And so really, I carried this camera on every tour that I went for the next year and a half. And so this went to, well, in addition to Luxembourg, then it went to Spain, it went to Italy, it went to Venice, Venice and Italy, went to Switzerland, it went to Paris, and did I make any other trips? No, I ran out of time and my enlistment was up, and so then it just came home with me. I continued to shoot this lens off and on, probably up until about 1990 or so. And then the demands of career and such, I dropped out of photography for a while, and I'm sure that the same thing has happened to some of you. In any case, I have rediscovered this lens, and so I really wanted to talk about it and talk about my experiences with this lens. So, in general, I found it to be a pretty good all-purpose lens, and I've taken some, I think, some very good photos with it, or at least I'd like to think they're very good. And I found this combination fairly simple to use. Like I said, obviously at 3.5 pounds, this is quite a handful, but it never really felt overly huge. And I think because the lens is sort of short, if it was nice and compact. I think if it had been like a much longer lens, right, then I think it would have felt more unwieldy. But because the lens is rather compact, I think that's what made it simple to use. So often on my trips, I carried this body in this lens. Then I also brought along with me, I also brought along the Nikon FE, which had a 50mm lens attached to it. And then in the bag, I usually had a 28mm and the Nikkor 105mm, the f2.5 105, really nice lens. I also have my little Rollei 35T. So on all my trips, I always had more than enough cameras. Probably, I suppose, too many. And you know what's interesting? None of my cameras really have ever gotten really banged up. I mean, there is some weathering here and there, but nothing too bad. So you can see that this lens has actually held up pretty well over the years. And here, let's take it off the camera body for a bit because I really want to talk about the camera. I really want to talk about the lens and not the camera. Obviously, this is for the Nikon F mount. Uh, all of these Vivitar Series 1 lenses were made available in different mounts because, of course, the goal was to sell these lenses to as many customers as possible and not just restrict it to one particular brand. So this also came in the Canon FD mount, Minolta, Olympus, Konica, Pentax, K, and then also in the first run they weren't made available for the Pentax K mount because that mount didn't exist. So it was available in the in the M42 screw mount. I almost said the Pentax screw mount. But it was available in the M42 screw mount. That particular mount I like a lot simply because today it's so easy to adapt it to other to digital cameras. Although, you know, generally you can always adapt these to others. What I always like about having the M42 mount is you just need that single adapter. So in this case, I need an adapter to go from M42, or in this case, I would need an adapter to go from Nikon F to Sony E. And if I ever wanted to use this on any other camera, then then you have to buy another adapter. So let's talk about the optical performance of this. I found it to be pretty good edge to edge as far as sharpness goes. One thing it does show barrel distortion when shooting at certain focal lengths and at particular distances. So for example, if you're shooting landscape, you tended not to notice it too much. But if you're in that medium distance, let's say 10 feet to 15 feet, there was noticeable barrel distortion. I don't know why. Well, I know why, because some things you just can't correct. I never noticed any objectionable pincushion distortion, which sometimes happens when you get to the telephoto end. And perhaps it was just because this was a 85 millimeter focal length. As I mentioned, in use, I never thought that it not being a true zoom was really a drawback. Because like I said, whenever you zoom in, you tended to refocus anyway, even with the true zooms. And I think that's true probably of autofocus cameras too, right? When you zoom in, you tend to hit that shutter button to force the camera to refocus. Was this lens shade any good? I think it did a decent job of cutting out stray light. Obviously, it's it's a lot wider than you normally would see, but I think it did a decent job of blocking stray light. So, what I also liked about this particular lens is it had a nice wide focusing ring. If it had been real narrow, I think this lens would have just been more difficult to use. But the fact that it's nice and wide allows you to really grip it. And because of the weight of the camera, or because of the weight of the lens, it also gave you a nice platform for the lens to rest in your hand so you could balance the camera and the lens together. I never really had the camera much on a tripod at that time, and could be because I didn't own a tripod. Or did I? No, I think I did. I think I owned this this miserable Velbon tripod. And I say miserable because I believe that Velbon tripod was very heavy, was not that easy to use because of how you had to attach a camera, and I just didn't use it that much, probably because it was such a pain in the neck. I think the quality of construction of this lens is very high. Everything just feels like it fits very nicely. There's no looseness to it. Even after, let me see, so I bought this in '79, so that would have been more than, oh geez, easily more than 40 years ago, coming up on 45 years ago. And so the fact that it is so smooth after all this time, that's a nice plus. Lens elements have remained clean. Well, that partly proper storage, and I've never really over-cleaned the lens. All the markings are engraved and filled, and so that's nice to see. When a manufacturer paints on the markings, what can happen over the years is that those markings can rub off. And so how did these rub off? No doubt it was putting it in and removing it from my bag probably hundreds and hundreds of times through the years. I believe I shot with this lens after 1981 when I was in college doing some newspaper work as a freelancer. When I had to go to different meetings or when I had to go to like these various clubs like Lions Club, Kiwanis clubs, and you would have to do what's called a grip and grin. That's usually, people lined up in a row and there's two people in the middle are shaking hands. That's what you call grip and grin. So when you had to do those type of photos, this worked really well because you could group, then you can zoom in almost precisely how you wanted. Now remember, there were no widescreen options in that day, so everything used your standard 35 millimeter. I believe that's a 4:3 aspect ratio. But it's okay because this lens, always did the trick. I think I shot a couple weddings with this lens too. It was fairly simple. So would I recommend that you buy this lens today? Some of it has to do actually with your strength. Do you have the physical strength to hold this lens and when it's mounted to a camera, whether it be digital today or film? And if you do, then I would say go ahead and try it. I think optically, the lens has always delivered to me very sharp photos, as long as I could hold it steady. There are going to be certain situations in which you get some barrel distortion. And however, that's only going to be noticeable if you have straight lines in the photograph. If you're shooting a group of people, you will never notice it. And it's just one of those things. You just won't notice it. But if you are shooting, let's say, a photograph of somebody's painting, let's say your friend has an exhibition opening and you want to take a photograph of some of their work, then you will notice it. So I think if you were to do that, step back, zoom it to maybe 50 to 55 millimeters, and you should be okay. I had scanned a bunch of photos, and here are some of them. So the first group is from Luxembourg, and you can see that it was fall, and I talked about that earlier. Next up is the World War II cemetery in Luxembourg, followed by General Patton's grave marker. And finally, here are some figurines that were for sale in a small shop. And I wanted to use this photo so you could see how well this lens did with focusing closely. I think the close focus distance is about 1 foot. The rest of these shots are from Paris. Here's the back or the front of Notre Dame in Paris. It's an impressive building from a distance, and it's even more impressive in person. After this, we walked around Paris, or we went to several different places around Paris. And then my roommate and I ended up at the Louvre. We had spent far too much time in the Louvre. I don't know if you could say that, but we spent a lot of time in the Louvre. And so here is the Venus de Milo, followed by the Winged Victory. So I chose not to use a flash. So in the film days, if you wanted to shoot in natural light, but also without flash, what you would have to do is what they call push the film. Or you would change the setting on your camera so it was reading at a higher speed and then overdevelop to compensate. In several of these shots, until we get to the final shot, I was using Ektachrome 400, which I pushed to, I believe I pushed this to 1600. In the next shot, you'll see what I'm talking about as far as barrel distortion. I believe when I scanned this, the slide actually slipped to the left, and that's why it appears to be cut off. I didn't actually cut it off. I think the slide just moved in its mount. However, once you get to the hall shot, the hall of paintings, you can see that all that distortion that was visible from a closer up shot has now disappeared. And so you really get a pretty nice shot, with fairly straight lines. You can see in this close-up of the Mona Lisa how now you're starting to get a bit of pincushion distortion, in addition to the fact that I couldn't apparently focus correctly. Oh, by the way, the Mona Lisa is a much smaller painting than you would expect. And this final shot was shot on Agfachrome. By the time we got to the Eiffel Tower, they had shut down the tour, so that was as close as we got. We actually went under it, but we never were able to go up into the Eiffel Tower. One thing that I learned as I reviewed my photos is, at the age of 19, I really didn't know much about photography, and I think that's very apparent as you take a look at these photos. However, I never did give up, and I kept trying, and I'd like to think that my photography improved over the years. So now let's return to the main part of the video and talk about this lens. So this is one of several Vivitar Series 1 lenses. Vivitar created the series as an alternative to the higher priced lenses made by the major camera manufacturers. And so the idea was that you could get higher quality than you would normally get from those third-party lenses. The third-party lenses sometimes they could have a dubious reputation depending on which one you purchased. Among the third-party lens makers, this was the first effort to really produce lenses that were of higher quality than what had been available in the past, because in general, a lot of third-party options were seen as not only lower cost alternatives, but also lower quality alternatives. So this is my review of the Vivitar 35-85 variable focus lens. We'll take a look at other lenses in the future. So don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. If you've owned this lens or any of the Vivitar Series 1's lenses, let me know in the comments below, or send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And I hope to see you on the next video.